Well, I think that with the scientific consensus as clear as it is now and so firmly expressed in the most recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, it underlines why we've put this at the top of our priorities in the World Bank Group, because basically what it's saying is that climate change is a threat intensifier and is going to make the pathway out of poverty and the pathway to prosperity so much more difficult for many countries, in fact for all countries. And therefore, as an economic development institution, this has to be something that we understand and that we can help our clients, whether the clients are countries or cities or regions or the private sector, work their way through. You know, for those reasons, I think that this is about it's about the future of development. Everything about development now has to take into account the need for low emissions development and the need for resilience. So I think the first thing to remember is that every country is at a different point in its journey, and there is something for every country to do right now. So you take a country like Peru, where they've made enormous progress in the last 20 years towards giving every Peruvian access to energy. And that's going to have to continue, but it's going to have to continue with a different blend of energy source than was the past. Now, luckily, prices and technology come together in a way that, you know, you can build out a gas infrastructure and you can build a lot more renewables on-grid and off-grid, and we can get to 95–100% of Peruvians with access to energy within the next decade. Then Peru has to manage its agriculture and has to manage its fisheries. They are a deep threat because of what might happen to water resources. So the question is, how do you imagine where the growth is going to come from? How do you imagine how to invest in the resilience that you need? Because every country is at risk, and Peru in particular it needs resilience. And then what are the tools available to you to be able to do that? And our role, I think, is to help each of these countries figure that out. I think the final thing I'd like to say is that there is a real need to be honest about the financing of this. So I think the important thing to remember is that even if we are enormously successful in the energy transition towards clean energy, if we don't address how we manage landscapes, while we curb emissions on energy and transport, the emissions from badly managed landscapes will just continue to increase. Plus we'll get the spiralling problems from continued deforestation and degradation of land. So bizarrely, forests are discussed in the UNFCCC, but agriculture isn't. That has to change. We have to have an integrated approach to landscapes, and for those countries which have forest resources and have huge agricultural footprints, this is an opportunity to manage the landscape for reduced emissions, for improved livelihoods and jobs, and for food and nutrition for a growing population. And that has to be the counterpoint to energy and transport and traditional mitigation measures. So I think that we're just on the cusp of really understanding how to do that. And countries like Indonesia, Brazil, Peru are in the lead in understanding how to do that. You know, in Indonesia there are, you know, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of hectares of degraded land. If we can improve the productivity of the degraded land and manage the emissions from that degraded land, that will have a huge impact on Indonesia's story of how it will move forward. And so there's a starting point which will be different for every country. So I think this COP is very important because this is where we're discussing what goes in a nationally defined contribution. And there has been a tendency in the UNFCCC over the recent past to focus on sort of supply-side financial initiatives, a new initiative here, a new platform here, a new fund here. That's all important, but we will never get the speed and scale of funding if there isn't really strong demand. Right? So the financing, the supply will come if the demand is there. And we already see countries like Chile, Morocco, who have put good regulatory frameworks in place. They have access to the capital markets and they are getting funding. Now, those INDCs then have to clearly establish that there will be regulation that will send very firm long-term signals to public and private financiers that there is a stable government view about which way the economy is going towards clean development, towards resilience. Prices have to be right, so energy pricing has to be right. Every country has to put a price on carbon. And then you'll start to see the financial markets respond and you'll start to see financing flow. So while we've been talking about supply a lot of the time, we really need to get demand right. And the INDCs are the place to do that. Now, there's one piece of the puzzle that isn't going to be met in this way, and that is the specific pressing needs for the most vulnerable and the most desperate of countries and communities who need massive investments in resilience right now. And we are going to have to mobilize new funds for resilience, and that will have to come from the public purse. Because we have a responsibility, and we also know that economically, if we invest in resilience now, we will save money over the next decade or 20 years, because every investment in resilience now will save not only lives, but will save money going forward. I am confident that there is a sense of urgency across all kinds of communities around the world, from faith-based communities to civil society to some financiers to engineers to climate scientists to some negotiators. I'm not at all confident that all of the people who need to be at the table to make the kinds of decisions that need to be made understand the urgency and understand that there is a bright green future. That we are not selling a future, a dystopian future. We're not selling sackcloth and ashes. We're selling the fact that for our sake and our children's sake and the natural resources' sake, there has to be a different way of growing. And we've done this before. In the mid-1800s, we used labour very inefficiently, and over the course of 150 years, we altered labour productivity by a factor of 10. We have to alter carbon productivity by a factor of 10, and we have to do it in 30 to 40 years. I don't see why we can't do that.